This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 50, from January 2001. The cover screams N64 with a big logo, and mentions Game Boy and GameCube too. Gotta love that Mario front and center. Plus Pikachu, promoting Hey You Pikachu! It mentions features on Mickey's Speedway, The World Is Not Enough, and WWF Number Mercy. There's also a Game Boy Pokemon trading card game feature, and a free Majora's Mask guide. Plus, 200 prizes to be won. I never won anything, but it was fun to dream. This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine issue 50, from January 2001. It's got a real retro feel, doesn't it? The big headline screams, "Welcome to N64" in that classic N64 font. The main image is of Mario, proudly displaying the 50th issue badge. There are smaller call-outs advertising features inside, like Hey You Pikachu, Mickey's Speedway, and WWF Number Mercy. Looks like there's a bit about the Pokemon trading card game, on Game Boy as well, plus something about Game Boy Advance shots. Backpack. Editor Andrea Ball welcomes readers, and there is a happy birthday to us message, celebrating the 50th issue. It seems the focus is on content for the N64, with news and reviews. There are also some words for the Nintendo World feature, and a look back on the magazine history. The page lists staff and contributors, the address for the magazine, subscription info, and a bit about future publishing. The next issue is advertised as being on sale on Friday the 19th of January. This page is the contents page of the magazine, dated January 2001. Planet 64 section includes a news desk piece, and a coming soon section with Banjo-Tooie, Mario Party 3, and Aiden Chronicles. N64 Arena, Mickey's Speedway USA, Import Arena, Hey You Pikachu, Ogre Battle 64, Cruisin' Exotica, Midway's Greatest Hits, and Ready to Rumble, Round 2. Regulars section, information station with release dates for top N64 titles, and a preview of the next issue, and a Planet Game Boy section on Pokemon trading card game. This page is the contents page of N64 Magazine. Right at the top, it's got the N64 Magazine logo, a future look section, with a promise of the biggest N64 games coming. This section starts on page 6, Dorkru. Then there's Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, described as tomb raiding, Zelda style. That's also on page 6. Following that is Battle for Naboo, a stunning Star Wars shooter, on page 8. There's the N64 Club 64 mailbox with Your Spleens Vented, starting on page 67 and 68 respectively. How To section, including WWF No Mercy and Twine on pages 72 and 76. There's a Tips Extra section for the N64's best-selling titles on page 80, followed by Dr. Kit's Game Clinic on page 85, and then Game On, with poppingly tough challenges, on page 86. I'm the Best is for the best scores and gamers, on page 88. There's also Skill Club Millennium on page 92, and The Directory, which gives a verdict on every N64 game in the shops, on page 96. Towards the bottom are back issues and subscriptions on page 106, and a special birthday feature for the N64 is 50, starting on page 26. There's a section called Fast Forward, promising a glimpse into the future of Nintendo and N64. There's a review of Mario Darts on page 108. Finally, there's a National Mariographic feature, described as being unearthed, on page 114. This page showcases a future look at upcoming N64 games, focusing on Indiana Jones. They're calling it the original Tomb Raider, on your N64, with a small preview score of 6. There's also a mention of Battle for Naboo, with the promise of stunning new shots of Star Wars Blaster, and a preview score of 8. The page gives some info on Indiana Jones, noting it's from LucasArts, the cartridge size is 128 megabits, it's a one-player game, controller pack isn't supported, expansion and rumble packs are supported, and transfer pack isn't supported. It says the game is out now in the US but TBA for the UK and Japan. Scattered around are screenshots with little captions. One says, "Forget to come up for air and you'll die." Naturally, the game's stuffed with minecart rides. Another points out, the size of Indiana Jones is astonishing. This is just a tiny part of the very first level. Cripes. There are other small screenshots showing Indy in various situations, with captions like, "Another coyote disappears beneath your wheels. Teehee, and this is no time for paddling. Indy gets searching for treasures." Another caption jokes, "Dive into the pool or clamber up to that high ledge. Decisions, decisions." There's also, "No need to press a button to read signs, thanks to the high-res visuals, and it takes time to unholster Indy's pistol, so holding it aloft, ready for action, is a sensible tactic." Finally, there's no single route through the minecart maze. Getting hopelessly lost is inevitable. The next page dives into Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine on the N64. It reckons it's what every fan wanted, whip-cracking and treasure-filled temples, but notes it's a conversion of a PC game, a Tomb Raider clone no less. Factor 5 has polished it up somewhat, and apparently used a Zelda engine in the process. There's a few screenshots dotted about with Indy in various precarious situations, from swinging across to chests in alcoves, navigating lava flows, and riding in a helicopter. It highlights the visuals, and says the animation is superb, especially how Indy grabs onto ledges with his satchel flapping about. It also praises the environments, from lush forests to snowy wastelands, and the metallic innards of the Infernal Machine itself. All in all, it seems like they're pretty impressed, and will give a full import review in the next issue. The next page, blimey, it's all about Star Wars Battle for Naboo on the N64. Factor 5 were really trying to give Rogue Squadron a run for its money with this one, weren't they? The screenshots do look fairly tidy for the time, with that classic N64 sheen. They reckon it has seriously hard missions, which, knowing the N64, is probably true. The info burst tells us it's a Nintendo joint, weighing in at 128 megabits, just one player, expansion and rumble packs are compatible, and they thought it was coming out in November or December. The article bangs on about how clear the visuals are compared to Rogue Squadron, and something about Turok-style fogging. They're saying the atmospheric lighting effects are top-notch, and you'll be doing battle in everything from the Naboo starfighter to a Trade Federation gunboat. Apparently no multiplayer though, which is a bit of a downer. Overall they seem pretty chuffed with it. Reckon Factor 5 have listened to criticisms, and they're expecting folks to go wild for it. Seems like they were really looking forward to getting their mitts on it in a month's time. The next page has Naboo plastered across it in big yellow letters. It's a preview of Star Wars Battle for Naboo on the N64. They're showing off screenshots, praising the graphics, vehicles, and the faithful return of the radar system from Rogue Squadron, or Pie and Cheese radar as they affectionately call it. They even joke about a seek and destroy mission for Jar Jar Binks cheeky. The reviewer sounds pretty excited, saying the city sections are massive and the game looks absolutely top class. This page, from the news desk section, is all about looking forward to the year 2001 in the world of Nintendo. It promises a thrilling 12 months for N64, Game Boy GBA, and GameCube. They were really trying to sell the hype, as always. The N64 was entering its 5th year, and was expected to host some sensational titles, despite Nintendo's, shall we say, flexible release date policy. There was talk of a groundbreaking N64 release, penciled in for almost every month. For the Game Boy, Pokémon Gold and Silver were coming in April, along with a new Zelda and Mario Tennis. September was supposed to bring Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was always a controversial one, wasn't it? The Game Boy Advance was also on track for a July release in Europe, with Mario Kart, F-Zero and Mega Man as some of the handheld delights. Finally, there was the GameCube. Its first fully playable appearance was expected at the E3 show in LA in May, with Wave Race, Metroid, and Luigi's Mansion on the cards. They were promising a July release in Japan, with the UK hopefully getting it before the end of the year. There's also a timeline of releases mentioned, with games like Mega Man 64, Banjo-Tooie, Pokémon Gold and Silver, Paper Mario, Kirby 64, and even the possibility of a new Mario game by the end of 2001. A lot of those dates did slip, but it's fun to see what they were planning. The next page kicks off with Shortcuts, a little section brimming with news. They're having a dig at the rather odd Dutch advertising for Zelda, Majora's Mask, commenting on its confusing design. Then there's a bit about WWF No Mercy finally getting the blood it deserves in the PAL version, though it means a slightly higher age rating. Those were the days of wrestling games being a big deal. The main headline is King of Charts, celebrating Nintendo's continued dominance with the N64 and Game Boy holding their own against the newer consoles like the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2. Zelda, Majora's Mask topped the charts in the US. Perfect Dark even stormed to #1 in Japan. Good to see a British game doing well abroad. Elijah. Finally, Cube Roundup hints at the upcoming GameCube. They're talking about the initial controller design that never saw the light of day. And finally, there is a N64 Magazine tips line. For a premium rate of £1.50 a minute, you can get help with various N64 games. Zelda, Majora's Mask and Perfect Dark of course, plus Pokémon Snap, Mario Party 2, Mickey Speedway USA, Rush 2049, Zelda, Ocarina of Time, DK64 and Pokémon Stadium. Those were the days. before the internet made all these tips readily available. The next page has a few bits and bobs. There's a piece about Peter Main, who was a big cheese at Nintendo of America, getting Mickey Mouse ears put on him to promote Mickey's Speedway USA. It also mentions a Banjo-Tooie advert involving skydiving. The main feature is titled A Winter's Tale, where Nintendo supposedly penned a poem about trouncing PlayStation 2 sales with the Nintendo 64 and Game Boy. The poem is a bit of a cringe, to be honest, especially using Majora's Mask to highlight the text. I guess they were proud. Then there's a piece called Brain Games, which is about school kids in Bristol getting to create their own video games, and the team behind N64 Magazine assisted them with their projects. The next page showcases new goods from the magazine's perspective. We've got some oddities here, like the Spin Pops, which they describe as sinister, and the Goose stretchy toy, which apparently caused some amusement in the office. There's also a bone-like Game Boy peripheral, a rather strange Manchester United Heroes action figure, and a Poochie robot dog. Rounding it off is the Rocket Hawk, a throwable glider. A chance to win a bone light is offered to readers who correctly answer the question of which bone is in the human arm from a multiple choice. The next page is from the Retro World section of the magazine, taking a look back at some retro titles. It starts with Tag Team Pro Wrestling on the NES, a wrestling game that apparently didn't quite live up to the WWF games of the time, not that I'm surprised. Then it mentions Ogre Battle, The March of the Black Queen, on the SNES, a strategy RPG that the reviewer clearly has a soft spot for. He recalls playing the N64 version but mentions the SNES game being something special. The page also features screenshots from both games. There's also a mention of Nintendo's profits being up, thanks to Pokémon and the Game Boy, and a strange answering machine message from Ash Ketchum. Very odd. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, which, at the time, was eagerly anticipated. It's got a Q&A section commenting on the improved graphics compared to Donkey Kong 64, and Geraint from the magazine apparently spent 6 hours playing it at Rare HQ. Lucky sod. B. There's an info burst section giving details like the game size being 256 megabits supporting 14 players. Of course it uses the expansion pack and rumble pack. The release dates are listed as now for the US, April for the UK, and TBA for Japan. Seems like they were really hyping it up with a full 5-star anticipation rating. Core. The main article mentions that the game's release date has slipped to April in the UK, which was a bit of a bummer back then. They reckon it could rival Mario 64 inches in terms of platforming greatness. Screenshots show off the Honeybee's Hive area, Mumbo getting a train running, and the ice key from the first game making a return. There's also a note about checking you've got Kazooie in your backpack before attempting a certain platforming section, alongside the Star Spinner subgame, and a glimpse of a strength test minigame that doesn't look too promising for poor old Banjo. The next page is a preview of Mario Party 3 for the Nintendo 64. It highlights the upcoming release with screenshots and details about the gameplay, and it seems like they were excited to get their hands on a copy for a full review. The reviewer jokes about Mario cleaning up after the parties and Waluigi gatecrashing the scene. To us. The preview points out that only a few of the 70 minigames are completely new, including a Tetris-inspired one. The controls were apparently intuitive, whether you were 8 or 80, and new playable characters like Waluigi and Daisy from Mario Tennis are included. The new dual tag mode is mentioned, where players travel around a board and then start fighting, which they thought was bizarre. There is a Q&A section which mentions that there are more minigames than ever, and 10 boards, including Christmassy snow-covered woods, and a fishy underwater paradise. The new battle mode allows players to kick a snowman or punch a thwomp in the face. Toad is now a companion in dual tag mode, and a new Nintendo character with a dice for a hat hosts the party. There is also some info on the game, stating it's from Nintendo, has a 128 megabits cart size, supports 14 players, has Rumble Pack support, and no controller or transfer pack support. The release date is targeted for December. Hazowo. The next page features a preview of Scooby-Doo, classic creep capers for the N64, comparing it to a Resident Evil-style game, with screenshots showing Shaggy and Scooby in various spooky locales. The reviewer notes the humor and faithfulness to the cartoon, even commenting on the lack of Scrappy-Doo. The game is given a fair anticipation rating. There's also a preview of Mysterious Dungeon Sharon the Wanderer 2 for the N64, which is described as a takey-turny adventure in the style of older games. The reviewer mentions the similarities to a turn-based Zelda, and touches upon the graphics being similar to Kirby 64. The game looks like an import title at the time. This page is all about Aiden Chronicles, a role-playing game for the N64 that was perpetually delayed. The preview highlights the visuals, claiming they're impressive even without the expansion pack. They mention the fairies looking a bit creepy and make a comparison to Zelda. The game is described as more of a traditional RPG than Zelda, with a darker fantasy world. There's talk of deliberately paced combat and plenty of spells, along with a story involving love, rivalry, intrigue and death. The info burst box states the game is from Nintendo, has a 128 megabits cart size, is single player only, and supports the controller pack and rumble pack. The anticipation rating is pretty high, with 3 out of 4 stars. It seemed like it had potential, but ultimately never came to fruition. I remember reading about it at the time, and it looked promising, but sadly we never got to experience it. This page features a celebratory image for the 50th issue of N64 Magazine. A group of folks, presumably staff, are gathered around a cake decorated with N64 branding and images of Mario and Pikachu. They're all wearing party hats and blowing party favors, generally looking like they're having a right old niece up. The headline reads, "We are 50," alongside a message saying, "Join us as we celebrate 50 fun-packed issues of N64. There's a brief intro written by Andrea Ball about how they decided to celebrate the magazine's milestone. This page features an interview with Jonathan Davies, a key member of the N64 Magazine team from its early days. He reflects on his favorite issues, with a nod to issue 28, highlighting Sean Russell's discovery of a kid using the Magnum cheat in GoldenEye. He also mentions Martin's review of Harvest Moon 2. Davies shares his fondness for GoldenEye and Mario Kart 64, admitting he was unbeatable at the latter in the office. He jokingly recalls the incident, where Will dressed up as Fusoya. He also expresses missing the experience of working on N64 Magazine, and humorously mentions Andrea's big stick and Will's elastic band attacks. The bottom portion of the page showcases the covers of N64 Magazine from April to November 1997. These include the Mario 64 and Turok Edition, Star Fox 64, Multi-Racing Championship, and Doom 64. The news blurbs tease topics such as the early UK release of Mario Kart 64, Conker's Quest unveiling at E3, and the prediction that GoldenEye will take the world by storm. The next page features an interview with James Ashton, who was the editor of N64 Magazine from issues 1 to 27. He's now the editor of Official Xbox Magazine, launching in 2001. His favorite issue was number 27, because it was the last one he worked on. He recalls playing ISS 64 so loudly with Tim that other magazines in the office complained. He considered Off-Road Challenge the worst N64 game he had to review, describing it as technically intricate as a short length of wood with a bent nail sticking out of it. He thought the best thing about working on N64 Magazine was the great team spirit and creative people. He remembers Andrea's Cossack dancing at a summer party as the funniest thing that happened, and misses Tim's inventive swearing. He was glad to see the back of Nintendo's secrecy policy and their detachment from the people who bought their games. There's also a top 5 N64 games list, including Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Majora's Mask, Lilat Wars, and Wave Race. Judd's top 5 N64 covers are Issue 28, Duke Nukem, Issue 38, Majora's Mask, Issue 30, Perfect Dark, Issue 49, Majora's Mask, and Issue 33, Hybrid Heaven. The page then has a timeline of the magazine in its last year, including the announcement of the GoldenEye sequel in June '98. It also features snippets about Nintendo preparing for Space World, Pokémon cartoons causing fits in Japan, Paul's plant sprouting another leaf, and N64 Magazine becoming Britain's best-selling N64 magazine. The next page features an interview with Will Overton, looking back at his time working on N64 Magazine. He's asked about what he's up to now, his fondest memories involving Zelda, the worst N64 game he had to review, and what he enjoyed most about working on the magazine. There's a bit of humor, like mentioning Tim drawing Nazi symbols on a vacuum cleaner box, and what he misses most changing the words to MC Hammer's Hammer Time to Savage Time. Will mentions issue 23, the Christmas '98 issue, being his favorite with the cart rack free gift. He also didn't like reviewing Superman, which Lex thought was rubbish. Kesey. He was also glad he didn't have to have his photo taken for Team 64. Kesey. There's a box out highlighting key issues from July '98 to January '99. July '98, Nintendo showed off Jet Force Gemini, Zelda and Perfect Dark at E3. Jet Force Gemini got a harsh directory summary, calling it vile, while Jeopardy was featured. August '98. The European Pokémon launch was delayed, with some rubbish being spouted by Fusoya about an unspeakable gelatinous blob king that lives in darkest Innsmouth. September 98. The GoldenEye bundle with a limited edition gold controller was released. October 98. Japanese kids were going mad for the Pokemon Stadium. Eat his Jess from Aqua was the most unlikely Team 64 member. November 98. Nintendo revealed details of the new 4 megabits expansion pack whack. December 98. The Legend of Zelda finally got a November 27th release date in the UK. Christmas 98. Zelda slipped again. January 99. Howard Lincoln revealed Zelda has 6 4D hooks. There are also Paul's top 5 N64 drivers, and Geraint's top 5 N64 shooters listed. Paul's list includes Mario Kart, Episode 1 Racer, Wipeout, World Driver and Roadsters, whilst Geraint's includes Lilat Wars, Rogue Squadron, Turok 2, Jet Force Gemini and Forsaken. This page is an interview with Tim Weaver, who worked on N64 Magazine, covering issues 1 to 41. He reminisces about his time on the magazine, mentioning favorite issues, the worst N64 game he had to review, which was Carmageddon 64, and funny incidents that happened in the office, and what he misses about working there. There are also snippets about what was happening in gaming news from February to September 99, with the covers of N64 Magazine from those months. Things like Rare confirming Donkey Kong 64, 2-year-old Samuel playing GoldenEye for 10 hours a day according to the Daily Mail, Shigsy confirming work on a new Metroid game, Ninty unveiling Dolphin and Ninty announcing Zelda for 6-4DD. The covers show off games like Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Mario Party Shadowman, Zelda Smash Bros, FIFA 99, Resident Evil, Duke Nukem 0 Hour, Perfect Dark and Shadowman. This page features an interview with Jess Bickham, who worked on the magazine from issues 7 to 41. He talks about his current role as the editor of the Nintendo channel on Future's website, and his past experiences interviewing Shigsy. His favorite issue was issue 24, and he recalls Clayfighter 63 1/3 being the worst N64 game he had to review, finding it so awful it gave him a headache. He also mentions Zelda, Ocarina of Time as a game he has fond memories of, having reviewed it in issue 24, and spending 2 weeks playing and writing the review. He enjoyed the creative and friendly team at N64 Magazine, finding their sense of fun and enthusiasm made the magazine what it was. One of the funniest things he remembers was when Tim defaced Mark's Hooverbox, and when they took a photo of Tim stuffing James' body into his Mini for the 20 jaw-dropping gaming moments feature in issue 28. He misses working with the team on a day-to-day basis, but still sees them often at Video Gamer. He is a fan of Will Overton's work and is excited to see what he's been working on at Rare. He jokes about being glad to see the back of Tim's incessant swearing and insults, but also mentions Andrea usually updating Skill Club, which wasn't the most interesting thing in the world. The page also includes snippets of news from October 1999 to April 2000. October 99 mentions Shigsy, revealing the Mario launch game for Dolphin. November 99 highlights the release of Duke, with a worrying revelation from Russell Vorpagel, ex-FBI agent. Christmas 99 features Tim's antics regarding 6-4DD in Japan, and his reaction to Carmageddon 64. December 99 mentions Nintendo's plan to unveil Dolphin in August 2000, and a bizarre headline about Adam Drake. January 2000 reveals Peter Main of NOA letting slip that Killer Instinct 3 will eventually happen, and an optimistic headline about Dolphin for Xmas 2000. February 2000 notes Pokemon's popularity on the internet, and Tim losing the plot. March 2000 mentions Conker's foul-mouthed revamp, and N64's alternative wallpaper monthly. April 2000 mentions delay rumors for Game Boy Advance, and an imaginative compo entry. There is also an image of the Clayfighter game being described as like having red-hot needles shoved in your eyes, and an image of Jess with darts stuck to his head. On the right is an image of Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark. Lumiwa. This page features an interview with Martin Kitts, who worked on N64 Magazine from issues 15 to 47. He discusses his current work with Tim on Video Gamer, his favorite and least favorite N64 games to review, the best aspects of working on the magazine, and a funny anecdote about a Jar Jar Binks toy incident. The page also includes images of the Game Boy camera, the Game Glover, and a photo of a person in a lab coat, which were all very N64 at the time. The page also features a May 00 Christmas 00 section, which highlights news and observations from past issues of the magazine. Games mentioned include Pokemon Stadium, Zelda, Majora's Mask, Turok 3, WWF No Mercy, Paper Mario, Banjo-Tooie, and Perfect Dark. There are also mentions of the GameCube and the upcoming Space World show. Kmart. This page is all about a massive competition, right on time for my birthday actually. It's giving away a Zelda gift set, which is blooming awesome for any N64 fan, and they're calling it the limited edition Majora's Mask Adventure set. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? They've got loads of other bits to give away too, over 200 prizes in total. Looking at the prizes, it's a right mixed bag, innit? N64 controllers, steering wheels, rumble packs, all the essentials you'd need for a good session on the console. Then there's Game Boy games, Pokemon stuff, bits and bobs like bone lights and travel kits, even some models of Dwight York the footballer. Bit random that. Already. To win, you had to answer questions from the last 6 issues of the magazine, classic magazine competition style back then. Post it off by the 22nd of January to an address in Bath, and if you're lucky you could bag that Zelda set or one of the other bits. They've got a picture of the Zelda set, looks pretty swish, with the box and all the bits inside. It's got that kind of exclusive feel they were pushing at the time with limited editions. There's a compo form to fill out, asking the questions and for your details. Standard stuff for entering mags competitions. They reckon the questions are difficult, cheeky sods, but they are telling you the answers are in the previous issues of the magazine, so you had to be a proper N64 magazine reader to get a chance. Good luck to anyone who actually sent this in back in the day. This page, alright, it's a Game Boy Planet section from an N64 mag, must be back when they still bothered with the little handheld. Right on the cover we've got Pokemon trading card game splashed all over it. Another monster hit, they're asking. Well, duh, it was massive. They've got Squirtle looking all cheerful, and loads of Pokemon cards scattered about, Pikachu, Charmeleon, Gyarados, the usual suspects. Looks like they've reviewed Koro Kirby, calling it Tilt and Tumble, and saying Kirby is back on the GBC in his most original title ever, Purus. Page 41 apparently. And then there's Pop N Pop, another puzzle game on the GBC, page 39. They're wondering if it can topple Tetris. Ambitious, eh? There's a win section, blimey. GB Internet add-ons and 2 radio-controlled stunt bikes. Rimmy. Internet on the Game Boy Color, remember that? Bit clunky. Then a PLS bit with Game Boy Gallery. Home away from home for the scary and deranged. Top tips for the latest GB titles. And every level code for Disney's finest platformers. Always useful, those level codes. Naught. Issue 25, January 2001. Yeah, those were the days. Pretty standard Game Boy coverage back then. This page is all about the exciting world of handheld gaming back in early 2001, focusing on the upcoming Game Boy Advance and a surprise entry from Microsoft, believe it or not. First up, it's confirmed that Doom is coming to the GBA. Apparently rumors were flying around about it, and it's true. A development team called Crawfish, based down in Croydon, have put together a tech demo. It sounds impressive for a handheld. They're talking about proper FPS style levels, smooth 3D camera movement, and solid graphics. They're not just porting Doom as is, but aiming for something that feels like Doom but works well on the GBA. Crawfish also showed off a couple of other demos, a Formula 1 racing game and a First World War biplane game. These are showing off the GBA's graphical tricks, like rotation, scaling, and parallax scrolling. They reckon a full GBA game from them will take about 6 to 12 months to make, which is a fair bit longer than a standard Game Boy game, but makes sense given the step up in tech. Apparently, dev kits for the GBA are expensive and hard to get hold of, costing $7,000 a pop. Elsewhere, there's talk about Sega and their situation. It seems after all their console struggles with things like the Mega CD, Game Gear, Nomad, 32X, Saturn and even the Dreamcast, they might be moving more towards just making software for other platforms, including Nintendo's. They're even thinking about converting some of their old classics for the GBA, which is interesting. Games like Streets of Rage, Power Drift, Shining Force and Space Harrier are mentioned as possibilities. Sounds good to me, some of those would be amazing on the go. And then there's a bit about Microsoft getting into the handheld market. They're planning a mini Xbox as a companion to the main Xbox console. Apparently they've decided against a pocket PC-style approach for it, and it's likely to be a stripped-down PC-based machine. Battery life is a concern, obviously. They're even talking about integrating it with the Game Boy Advance and GameCube in some way, which is a bit vague. They also mention the Panasonic and GamePark handhelds, which had built-in Game Boy emulators, and say Nintendo's lawyers probably won't be too happy about that. Interesting times ahead for handheld gaming, that's for sure. This page is all about gadgets and competitions, proper magazine fodder this. Up top, there's a piece on getting your Game Boy online, which seems a bit mad, doesn't it? Apparently Dattle bless 'em have brought out something called Action Replay Online and World Port, so you can download cheats for your Pokemon games and whatnot directly to your Game Boy, which is pretty nifty if you were into that sort of thing back then. And the World Port even lets you send emails on your Game Boy using your home phone line, can you believe it? Bit of a faff involving your PC as well, mind. They say the action replay is £25 and the World Port itself is £20. There's even a competition to win a World Port if you send in a good Game Boy tip. And they're asking how much you think a Game Boy Advance will cost in the UK, cheeky. Options are a tenner, 70 to 100 quid, or 2.5 grand. Madness. Then below that, it's all about tiny stunt bikes. Infogrames are pushing their Supercross World Championship game, and they've sent in these remote control bikes, proper boys' toys these are, costing 100 quid each. Blimey. They've even had a bit of a mishap with one in the post. Sounds about right. They're giving one bike and 5 copies of the game away if you can answer why Mario doesn't ride a motorbike. Bit of a daft question if you ask me, but there you go. Closing date is 26th of January, better get your skates on if you're reading this back in the day. This page is a review of the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy, so going handheld with the card game. Clever idea really. They've got this ultimate buying guide at the top, rating games from 5 stars, simply fantastic, down to 1 star, utterly lamentable. Bit harsh that bottom end, but alright. The review itself is laid out with sections like deck dealing, explaining the basics of building a good deck, emphasizing card limits, and the different types, Pokemon, energy and trainer cards. It's pretty standard card game stuff, but Pokemon themed, so of course it was going to be massive. They've got screenshots showing Pikachu and a Charmeleon, and bits about energy cards being crucial for attacks and retreats, which is obvious really, isn't it? There's a verdict section calling it one of the finest in-depth strategy experiences ever, and not to be missed. Bit strong, but it was good for a handheld card game, I suppose. They reckon it's easy to learn but with depth, and visually similar to the RPGs, which it kind of is in a pixelated Game Boy way. Overall, sounds like they were quite impressed. The next page is all about the Game Boy Color game card game, which I reckon is probably the Pokemon trading card game. It looks like a review from N64 Magazine, which is a bit odd reviewing a Game Boy game, but hey, maybe it was a slow month for N64 releases back then in January 2001. Motopi. The reviewer seems quite keen on it, describing it as having unadulterated brilliance. They talk about the card battles being similar to the classic red and blue games on the Game Boy, which is a nice touch for nostalgia. There's something called an auto deck machine to help you build decks, which sounds handy, especially if you are new to card games or just lazy. The page also mentions Go Clubbing, where you battle masters in different clubs like the Lightning Club, with Rockhard Pikachu apparently, and the Fighting Club. Sounds like you need to beat all the pupils before taking on the masters to get badges and cards. They do say battling in specific clubs gets you specialized cards, which is a decent incentive. There is a section on multiplayer madness which talks about link-up battles and card pop, for getting extra cards by linking with a mate. They reckon it's good fun playing against someone else's deck. Overall, the reviewer seems to think it's a solid card game, especially for those who are into deck building and strategy, and they've slapped a 5-star rating on it, so it must be alright. This page features a couple of game reviews, classic stuff from back in the day. First up we have Pop and Pop from Taito. Seems like another one of those Japanese puzzle games with cute characters and a world in danger from an evil king. Apparently instead of guns or kung fu, you're deflecting attacks with brightly colored balloons, a bit like Booster Move then. They're saying it's a colorful puzzler, where you match 3 or more balloons, trying to stop this balloon mountain from overwhelming you. Sounds like a decent time waster, and they've given it a 3 out of 5, saying it's competent and challenging enough but nothing amazing, comparing it to Tetris but maybe not quite reaching those heights. Then there's Army Men, Air Combat from 3DO. This is a bit more like it for action fans. They're saying if you liked Desert Strike on the SNES, then this Army Men helicopter game will be right up your street. You're flying around in a green chopper, in isometric landscapes, doing missions, and wiping out the Tan Army. It sounds alright, but the reviewer reckons the controls are a bit lacking, especially with the co-pilot aiming for you at times, which can be frustrating when your target gets away. They still give it a 3 out of 5, saying it's enjoyable enough and challenging, just not perfect but decent enough. This page features a couple of Game Boy reviews. First up is Koro Koro Kirby, an import from Japan. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed with it, reckons it's magic and very original, comparing it to that Labyrinth game where you rolled the ball bearing around. They are saying Nintendo has outdone themselves again with this handheld genius idea. It's a bit different from just guiding a ball around, you're rolling Kirby around, bashing enemies and collecting stars, all in a top-down shooter view. They reckon the movement is so accurate it feels like there's a marble rattling inside your Game Boy Color. Sounds quite something. It got a stonking 5 out of 5, essential for Kirby fans apparently. Then there's Supercross World Championship for the Game Boy Color, and they are not quite as impressed with this one. They mention Top Gear Rally 2 on the N64 as a better racer, which is fair enough. They reckon the small screen doesn't really do it any favors. It's like a Simon Says memory game with button combos apparently. Nothing special to write home about. If you're a motocross nut, you might get a bit of a kick out of it, but for everyone else they're suggesting checking out Top Gear Rally 2 or Tokay on the PlayStation before even thinking about this one. It only got a 3 out of 5. This page of Planet Guide is all about the Game Boy, bless it. We've got Professor Oak on hand again, answering some Pokemon Gold and Silver questions. Seems like everyone was struggling to evolve their Togepi back then, just keep it happy apparently. And Lugia in Silver? Whirlpool Remover HM06 is your friend there. Classic. Dorcha. Then there are level codes for the Jungle Book on Game Boy. Remember that Disney platformer? Probably made life easier navigating those digital trees. And for Donald Duck, Quack Attack, another Game Boy title. Level codes for that too, Forest, City, Mansion and Inca levels, for those grumpy duck adventures. Lastly, some Game Boy Action replay codes, specifically for Perfect Dark on the handheld. Infinite ammo, health, one-hit kills for the Spider Boss, all the usual cheat stuff. Handy if you were struggling with Joanna Dark's portable adventure. This page is the Game Boy Gallery, which was always a laugh. It's a section where readers sent in their pictures taken with the Game Boy camera. Remember that brick? People really got creative with it, considering what a basic bit of kit it was. There's a winner photo at the top. Seems like some dodgy looking fella. And he's won a Joytech Action Pack, which was probably quite a decent prize back then. Came with all the bits and bobs for your Game Boy Color and Pocket. Then it's just loads of reader snaps. Dave Fryer reckons he spotted a new Pokemon in his photo. Looks a bit like Meowth, bless him. Jack Bircher from Surrey. Well, his photo's a bit odd, but they're going along with it. There's one from Mikel Martinez in Ireland. Looks like a mustachioed face. They're calling it a mutation. Wimbledon's Lewis Falstein sent in a photo that's got someone crying. Apparently Steve is. Ollie Downs and Doug Miller are supposedly responsible for some mutated menace. Judging by their picture, looks like a bit of a dodgy face drawn on something. Dim Flabé from the Netherlands. Well, they reckon he's got the best name ever. No idea what the photo is. It's tiny. Michael Barry from Newmarket. They like his thin head. Whatever that means. David Jones from London's posed a question with 2 photos, ugly and bad, and they prefer the ugly one. Yorkshire's Mike Hunter sent in something scary, causing sleepless nights apparently. There's Mickey Mouse looking a bit worse for wear after a speedway accident according to James Knowles from Dudley. Annalisa Vaksha from Hampshire has sent in a photo they are licking their lips at, whatever that's about. And finally, Elwyn Mail from Solihull has supplied a picture with a do not insult warning, which is always asking for trouble, isn't it? And Oren Rao from Norfolk reckons he's captured alien life. So yeah, just the usual Game Boy camera madness, good times. This page is bursting with N64. Goodness, right in your face. It's clearly the start of the game's reviews section, with a massive N64 arena splashed across the page. First up is Mickey's Speedway USA. Looks like Disney fancied a bit of the Mario Kart action, and fair play, why not? They're asking if Rare's take on the kart racer can beat the Ninty classics. We'll soon see about that. There's a screenshot of Mickey driving around a city course looking rather cheerful. Then there's a bit for the import arena, reminding us to check out the games they're playing over in America and Japan. Always good to see what's coming over the pond, or from the land of the rising sun, before it hits our shores. Menna. Next, we've got Hey You, Pikachu! Menna, remember that one? Chatting to Pikachu with a microphone. They've got some of the daft voice lines there like, Hey Pika, want a lolly? No. Yeah, right. Kids probably loved it, talking to their telly. But for us, older gamers, not so sure. Screenshots of Pikachu, indoors and outdoors, looking very yellow and electric rodent-like as usual. Moving down, there's Ogre Battle 64. They're calling it the N64's first real RPG, which is a bit of a statement, isn't it? Tops, they reckon. Screenshot looks like a strategic battle map, with little sprites clashing swords. Proper old-school RPG stuff. Chukaka. Next is Cruisin' Exotica. Can they get it right this time? That's the question they're posing. Cruisin' games were always a bit Marmite, weren't they? Screenshot of a car driving through some crazy track with a shark-shaped submarine in the background. Bonkers. B. Then we've got Midway's Greatest Hits. Old school, they say. Screenshot looks like Defender, or something like that. Proper retro arcade action. Good for a nostalgia trip, I suppose. Finally, Ready to Rumble 2. Round 2 for Midway's Slugathon. Screenshot of 2 cartoonish boxers going at it. Butter mashy fun, no doubt. Ready to Each game has a little go-to-page thing, so you know where to find the full reviews. Page 46 of issue 50, by the looks of it. Right then, let's see what they make of these games, shall we? This page kicks off with a How It Works guide to N64 reviews in this magazine. It's laying out the essential information you'd find in their game write-ups. Things like the game's publisher, cart size, player count, controller pack needs, and if it uses the expansion or rumble packs. They even list release dates for different regions and the cost, which back then was about 40 quid. Remember paying that much for a game? Ouch, ouch. There's a bit about if you're in a hurry, basically saying they break down the good and bad bits into pluses and minuses. And if you like a certain type of game, they'll suggest similar ones, using examples like, if you liked GoldenEye, you might like Turok 2 or Quake 2. Solid logic there. Then it explains how N64 scores a game. Apparently, 85% and above gets you a star game badge, which was a big deal. Anything over 70% was considered perfect and well worth adding to your collection. 50% to 69% is playable, but not special. Below that, you're getting into dodgy territory, right down to 0.19%, which is described as absolute wretched crud. No messing about there then. Finally, there's a Team 64 inches section where the reviewers have apparently been playing kart races in Bath. Bit random. Each reviewer has a little blurb about their karting experience, and a Game of the Month pick. Andrea Ball's pick is Hey You Pikachu. Justin Webb went for Cruisin' Exotica. Mark Green chose Mickey Speedway. Dark Mark bizarrely picked Ogre Battle 64 inches for a karting theme. Martin Kitt said Midway's Hits. Paul Edwards also went with Cruisin' Exotica. Alan Cadrell and Steve Jaleem both went for Ready 2 Rumble 2. And Geraint Evans another, Hey You Pikachu. Seems like Hey You Pikachu and Cruisin' Exotica were popular in the office that month. Or maybe they just couldn't agree. This page is all about Mickey Speedway USA. Blimey, another kart racer back then. It's from Rare, so you'd expect decent things, wouldn't you? It's on a 128 megabit kart, so a fairly chunky size for the time, and up to 4 players can race. The review is a bit mixed, to be honest. They call it a rehash of Diddy Kong Racing, and a clone of Mario Kart 64, which isn't exactly glowing praise, is it? They mention you grab coins to upgrade your engine, and they think the remote-controlled plane power-ups are rubbish. They even moan about the coins having Mickey's face on them being yuck. Looks like the reviewer was a bit underwhelmed, and to be fair, there were so many kart racers at the time, it was hard to get properly excited for another one unless it was really special. Rare were usually top-notch, but maybe they were spreading themselves a bit thin with all the games they were doing. It was out now in the UK and USA, but TBA for Japan, and cost £45. This page is all about Mickey Speedway USA on the N64. Looks like they're trying to sell it to us as a sort of Mario Kart alternative, which was always a tall order, wasn't it? They're laying out the how it works of the game, breaking it down into sections like tracks, tournaments, cups, and car parts. Tracks-wise, we've got 20 of them, apparently all themed around different US states, which sounds a bit random, but alright. Tournaments are your standard affair, 5 increasingly tricky ones, with different difficulty modes. Cups are there to unlock more tracks and tournaments, which is pretty standard progression for these karting games. Then they're on about car parts, Ludwig von Drake's car parts to be precise. Apparently if you find all 4 hidden in the first 16 tracks, you unlock frantic finale courses, which sounds like a bit of extra challenge for those completionists out there. Looking at the screenshots, they're showing off some of the courses. One caption mentions picturesque practice, and another is about nightmarish USA-themed course designs with lots of 90-degree turns. Which, yeah, that does sound a bit much, doesn't it? Bit of a Mickey take if you ask me, no pun intended. Still, it's Mickey Mouse karting, so kids will probably lap it up. This page showcases a how-to guide to win the Platinum Cup in Mickey Speedway USA for the N64. Right then, Mickey Speedway USA, a decent kart racer for its time, though let's be honest, it wasn't Mario Kart, was it? It tries to capture that Disney magic, but it's a bit of a shameless rip-off, as they even mention further down the page. The guide focuses on 2 tracks, Indianapolis and San Francisco. For Indianapolis, it's all about power sliding and collecting coins to speed up, typical kart racer strategy. It talks about sliding on darker sand and hitting zippers for boosts. For San Francisco, the tips involve tunnel driving, power slides, and hugging curbs, standard stuff if you've played any kart racer back then. Legu. There's a sidebar labeled Cheating Heart, which talks about built-in cheats, and mentions the digital speedometer as being invaluable for time trials, suggesting it can shave milliseconds off your best times. Tiny racers cheat though. Boring, they say with a bit of sarcasm. Then there's Animal Aggression, talking about the weapons in the game, RC cars and toy planes being the equivalent of red and blue shells. They mention bananas and magic stars too. Every kart racer had those, didn't they? They even have a screenshot of the multiplayer weapons menu, with options to turn on or off things like shield shell, stormy weather, and triple baseballer. The page overall is giving you a nudge to master Mickey's Speedway USA, but it's clear even they know it's no Mario Kart beta. But hey, someone out there probably enjoyed it at the time. This page is all about Mickey Speedway USA, a pretty decent kart racer on the N64 if I remember rightly, though obviously not quite in Mario Kart's league. It's giving tips for a section called Traffic Troubles on the New Mexico and Grand Canyon tracks. For New Mexico, they're guiding you through 5 sections, mostly about hitting turns right and using the sides of tunnels to get coins. Over on the Grand Canyon side, it's a similar deal, focusing on sliding around turns, using ramps and dodging pillars to grab more coins. There's also a bit about the Practice Makes track, which sounds a bit of a confusing mess according to the magazine, with beaches and farms and chickens, and they're not even sure what it's for. A bit strange that, eh? Down at the bottom they're talking about Balloon Battle, which let's be honest is nicked straight from Mario Kart. They say the tracks are a bit bizarre, with one being flat like a SNES game. They reckon it's a bit random popping balloons, and probably not as good as Diddy Kong Racing's multiplayer. Fair enough, Diddy Kong Racing was pretty top-notch multiplayer back then. This page from N64 Magazine issue 50, titled Seen It All Before, well, it's pretty clear what they are on about from the get-go. It's all about Mickey Speedway USA and how much it borrows, or some might say, blatantly copies, from Mario Kart 64. The article is broken down into sections comparing the two games. For the start, they point out how Mickey Speedway has Dewey Duck rescuing racers, a bit like Lakitu in Mario Kart, but instead of a cloud, Dewey has lamps on a fishing line, which is different, I suppose. Moving on to obstacles, they mention giant crates in Philadelphia in Mickey's game, falling on your head. Very similar to Bowser's Castle's thwomps in Mario Kart, pretty much identical apparently. Even the crate movements are apparently ripped straight from Mario's game. Tracks-wise, Mickey's Speedway has you racing around the White House, described as red carpeted corridors, similar to Bowser's Castle again, just with chandeliers this time. They admit the White House is prettier though, which is a low bar to clear, let's be honest. Finally, battle mode. Surprise surprise, it's 4 racers, balloons to pop, weapons, just like Mario Kart. They sarcastically remark that Rare's ideas must have been on holiday when they came up with that one. The reviewer does concede that Mickey Speedway has speed going for it. And plenty of it. Apparently, on the harder settings, it's properly fast, and the tracks with ramps and tight corners make for exciting racing. They mention the handling is good for navigating gaps, and that the Jet Force Gemini team were involved in that aspect. Lekbarksaw. They also talk about the weapons in Mickey Speedway, saying they are not a patch on Mario Kart's shells, bananas and lightning bolts, but the speed and handling apparently make up for it. The tracks, set in different US states, are well designed apparently, mentioning downhill sections and tricky chicanes, but they can be frustrating at first until you get used to them, and then you'll be flying around Las Vegas, Oregon and Alaska. So overall, it's painted as a decent kart racer, fast-paced and all that, but undeniably standing in the shadow of the king, Mario Kart 64. Can't say I'm surprised, everyone was trying to get a slice of that karting pie back then. This page is a review of Mickey Speedway USA for the N64. Right then, Mickey Mouse in a kart racer, who'd have thought it? It's getting an 80% verdict score here, which isn't bad at all. They're calling it a worthy if often terrifically unoriginal rival to Mario Kart. They've got a little box out with pluses and minuses, pluses being fast, faultless handling and decent track design. Minuses are unforgiving CPU opponents, disappointingly short-lived, and awful weapons. Sounds about right for a kart racer trying to muscle in on Mario's territory back then. Warra. They're saying if you like this, then you'll like Mario Kart 64 naturally. Calling it unbeatable kart-based racing, which it pretty much was, wasn't it? The review talks about the flowing track layouts and scenery that's prettier than Diddy Kong Racing's, which is a bold claim. Diddy Kong Racing was rather lovely on the eyes. They mention lush forests, tumbling waterfalls, sunset cities, and the White House's gargantuan grounds. There are screenshots dotted around showing the game in action karts racing on various tracks, one with the White House in the background, another with Mount Rushmore, which they cheekily point out as original. Spotted Mickey and Donald on Mount Rushmore. Very subtle. They're also talking about how tough it is, saying the CPU karts are approaching the perfect lap every time, and a single mistake will lose you the race. Sounds frustratingly difficult then, bit like those old arcade games that just rinsed your pocket money. They're going on about tight corners and booster-laden straights, and how mastering the corners is key. Apparently, There's a skill to pushing left or right at the top of hills, one of those Mickey skills you need to master. Oh, and keep an eye out for shortcuts and changes in track surface. Ratings-wise, it's 8 for visuals, saying it resembles Jet Force Gemini somehow, creating lovely-looking tracks. Sounds is a 6, apparently Mickey Mouse's voice is truly the most irritating of all time. Bit harsh maybe, but Mickey can be a bit grating. Mastery and Lifespan both get a 7. Mastery is fast, smooth racer, but it's hardly the first on the N64. And Lifespan is, once the single player's over, time trial is almost all that's left. So a decent kart racer then, but not quite Mario Kart levels. 80% feels fair enough for a solid but maybe not groundbreaking title. This page is all about, hey you Pikachu! Looks like N64 Magazine was having a right good chuckle about this one. They're calling it, laugh, play and, curse with the yellow fella. Bit cheeky that. Anyway, it's a preview piece, going over what they'd seen so far. Seems like you're supposed to be talking to Pikachu, and from the screenshots, he's getting up to all sorts of mischief chucking tissues about, wandering off, generally being a bit of a rascal. They mention using the toolbox for interactive goodies, and that you're supposed to seek out lost wags whatever they are. There's an info burst box that tells you the basics. It's a Nintendo game, naturally. Cartridge size is 128 megabit, which was pretty standard back then. 1 to 4 players, controller pack needed, cartridge save, no password, expansion or rumble pack needed, and no transfer pack either. It was out now in the US and Japan, but typical, still TBA for us Brits at the time. Cost was $90, about 63 quid. Blimey, games were pricey back then, weren't they? Overall they seem quite amused by the whole idea of chatting to a Pikachu, but also a bit unsure what to make of it if I'm honest. They mention honing their pseudo-American accents, which is a bit of a dig at the voice recognition thing I reckon. Still, they were clearly keen to get their hands on it and join the poker-loving happy family. Right then. This page is all about, hey you Pikachu. Right then, so they're calling it fun in more ways than one, but the reviewer's already having a moan, saying fun isn't exactly the word we should use here. They reckon it's more tedious than fun, and all about frustration, because Pikachu is a right pain. But they are going through some of the best bits of this game for our delectation. First up is caring for Caterpie. Apparently you have to stop Caterpies getting hungry, while Butterfree is off somewhere. If they get peckish, they start glowing and chattering, which sounds charming, doesn't it? You need to find rosebuds to shut them up. Next, Little Lost Poliwag. Seems a bunch of Poliwags have got themselves lost in the fog. Classic Poliwags. You and Pika have to hunt for them and take them back to Squirtle's cave where their mum is waiting. Good deed for the day, eh? Then there's Gone Fishing. This one they admit is their favourite, but it's still no Zelda fishing game apparently. Pikachu chucks the line in, and you have to tell him to reel it in, pull or hang on. They say it's just about as good as it gets, which isn't exactly a glowing review, is it? Finally, the Pinata Party. This sounds a right laugh. You have to guide a blindfolded Pikachu around the beach with left, right, forward, and swing commands. Then you watch him bury his face in the dirt time and time again. Absolutely priceless, they say, which I think is sarcasm for utterly ridiculous, but we have to fill pages. It also says, every Pokemon hides an evil side. Steady on, mate, and your reward for sticking with him. Looks like they're implying Pikachu is a bit of a nightmare to put up with, but you get a pat on the back if you manage it. So yeah, that's hey you Pikachu, according to this page. Doesn't sound like a barrel of laughs, but there you go. This page is all about, hey you Pikachu, a bit of a quirky one for the N64, wasn't it? It's styled as, a day out with our new, well Pikachu naturally. Right at the top, under Charmless Man, we see a bloke looking rather glum while playing. Apparently he was hoping to get cozy with Pikachu, but realized the game is a bit resistant to charm. Ah well. Then it runs through a day in the game. Number 1 is, Morning Pika. Number 2, we're off to see Bulbasaur who wants us to find ingredients for a stew. Sounds like typical fetch quest stuff, fun for a bit. Number 3, our trusty companion is all too eager to help. Ah, bless ya Pika. They're being a bit sarcastic here, aren't they? Number 4, Professor Oak pops up and needs a hand. Classic Oak move. Number 5, Pikachu seems to be obeying commands. Don't do that, and it works. Nice one, Pika. Number 6, they found a carrot. Perfect for the stew. Okay, sure. They still sound thrilled, don't they? Pa. Number 7, CHU is waiting for Magnemite. Top stuff? That's the first ingredient. They're calling Pikachu a clever mouse. A bit generic given it's Pikachu, but there you go. Below that, there's a bit about how the voice recognition is a bit hit and miss. It can understand certain words highlighted in red, but even then, it's inconsistent. Phrases like how's it smell, apparently get strange reactions from bashful swaying to angry frowning and even thunder shocks. Sounds about right for voice recognition tech of that era, a bit temperamental. They mention it can be exciting watching Pikachu react to your voice, but quickly realize the game is a bit flawed. It mentions scintillating challenges, such as making stew with Bulbasaur, dripping with sarcasm that is. And they reckon the graphics aren't much cop either, a bit sloth-like. Overall they seem to be saying it's a cute idea, super cute, but the actual game is a bit lacking, even for the N64. Kinda sums up, hey you Pikachu, really, nice idea, but perhaps didn't quite live up to the hype. This page is reviewing Hey You Pikachu for the N64. It's presented as a kind of step-by-step walkthrough, showing Pikachu getting up to various things. It looks like a right laugh, showing Pikachu holding an onion and looking a bit miffed at a mushroom. There's comments in speech bubbles, like Pikachu saying, Arga Pika mate new. Stop it, Pika don't eat it, daw. They've got a pluses and minuses section, saying the animation is excellent and it's cute, but then on the minus side, calling it dull, poorly executed and frustrating. They reckon if you like this you might like Pokemon Snap, which was alright I suppose, a bit of a one-trick pony though. They give visuals a middling score, sounds are okay, but mastery is low, and lifespan is a 4 out of 10 doesn't sound great does it? The verdict is pretty harsh, saying it's pretty dismal and only for preschoolers if they can afford it, giving it a score of 56%. Ouch. Sounds like a bit of a stinker then, maybe best avoided and stick to Pokemon Snap if you want your Pikachu fix on the N64. They definitely aren't holding back here. This page features Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Calibre. Looks like they're calling it Person of Lordly Calibre, a bit of a mouthful, innit? Apparently Mark got his hands on the Japanese version way back in issue 34, so they've been following this one for a while. There's a bunch of screenshots dotted around showing off different bits of the game. Looks like your standard strategy fare, with units moving around on a map. They point out things like sharing items between units, the main overworld map being quite large, and different combat formations. One bit talks about how attacking from different directions can mess up the enemy, which sounds like a good tactical tip. Another screenshot mentions not bothering with soldiers and going straight for the leader, which is a classic strategy in these types of games really. There's also something about a dragon doing the fighting while you stand back, and a nun character healing wounded warriors, typical RPG stuff. Down at the bottom there's an info burst box, published by Atlas, 320 megabit cart, 1 player only. Controller pack is ticked, cartridge save and password save are both ticked too. No expansion pack, rumble pack, or transfer pack. Says it's out now in the US and Japan, but TBA for the UK, which is a bit of a pain. Cost is about 60 quid, or roughly 42 of your English pounds. Rumble pack. They also mention you can name your forces, and apparently it's got hilarious comedy potential, which is a bit of a stretch, but I suppose you could have some fun with that. Overall it's looking like a solid strategy game, if you're into that sort of thing. This page takes a look at Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Calibre, breaking down how to get started in a fight. It's described as a quick overview of the game's gameplay, assuring you it's not as complicated as it first appears. The article is split into sections covering objectives, units, attacking, and how to win. For objectives, it mentions that at the start of each campaign, you'll be given a specific target, usually capturing the main enemy stronghold. It points out the importance of keeping your main character alive, as their defeat means game over. Smart advice, that, especially for back then, permadeath was a bit more common. Units are covered next, explaining that your army is divided into units led by different characters. Units are made up of various fighting classes like soldiers and magicians. To take on tougher enemies, you combine several units into a legion. Makes sense. Strength in numbers, eh? The attacking section talks about how unit arrangement affects attacks. Grouping characters can create combos, but generally, strong warriors up front, leader and ranged fighters towards the back is the best approach. Solid tactical advice for any strategy game really. How to win section suggests attacking the leader of each enemy unit to make the minions retreat, which is a good tip. It also highlights checking enemy health stats, and targeting the weakest member when your character is near death to reduce the opponent's attack power. Classic strategy stuff, but crucial in the heat of battle. There are screenshots dotted around, showing map screens with objectives like Castle Dunkweld, dialogue boxes with Hugo the Tactician explaining tactics to Prince Euanil, unit formation screens, and even a lightning spell effect. They've even got a shot of retreating, but only as a last resort apparently. Down at the bottom, under the heading 64 Calibre, it proclaims the game's fighting system is better than anything in a conventional RPG, which is a pretty bold statement. The text dives into the story, about a rebellion and player choice, mentioning your character, Magnus, who starts as a young army recruit. It mentions it's like the latest update of a series fondly remembered on the SNES, likely referring to the original Ogre Battle, and compares it to PC wargames like Command & Conquer, placing it firmly in that strategy RPG category. It distinguishes it from Final Fantasy-style RPGs, which were all the rage at the time, highlighting that Ogre Battle is doing something different. There are a couple of funny captioned images at the end, one with Zontac saying, "Welcome to your doom, my reckless prince," followed by, "We gave Zontac a rather painful beating for his insolence," and another with sleeping soldiers and the caption, "Our men were ambushed while asleep. Oops." Bit of light-hearted humor there to finish off the page. Overall, it's a decent intro to Ogre Battle 64, getting across the core gameplay elements and hyping it up as something a bit special for the N64. This page is a review of Ogre Battle 64 for the N64. Right then, Ogre Battle, now that's a name that takes me back. This review is calling it a strategy game with attitude, which sounds about right. The page breaks down the game into sections, like action stations. It talks about alignment, saying your choices affect your character's personality and how others react to you. Bit like real life in it. Then there's navigation, mentioning different unit types and how they move around the map, even across mountains if they are lightweight. And tactics, which is all about managing up to 10 units at once, and keeping track of them, setting up camps and all that strategic malarkey. There's a pluses and minuses bit. The good stuff is stylish hand-drawn graphics, massive tactical depth, several endings, and a lasting challenge. Minuses are expensive on import, and they haven't found a converter cart that works yet, which isn't ideal if you're importing it, obviously. If you like, this section compares it to Command & Conquer on the N64, saying it's strategically similar, but not as good as Ogre Battle 64 apparently. Bit harsh on Command & Conquer, that was decent on the N64, if a bit simplified. Then there are these numbered sections, visuals getting a 7, saying it's retro but nice to look at. Sounds also a 7, typical old world RPG soundtrack. Mastery a 7, meaning there's a lot going on under the hood. Lifespan a 9, saying it'll take ages to finish, even longer to explore everything. Sounds like a proper time sink then. The verdict section is pretty glowing, calling it a great combination of thoughtful strategy and exciting combat, with an RPG plot. It's got a Star Game Award, and an 87% score. The reviewer seems to think it's definitely worth getting hold of on import, saying there's nothing else like it on the N64, and it will keep you busy for ages, apparently long enough for them to write the sequel. Japanese developers Quest, they took their time making it, but it sounds like all the effort paid off. They even mention the expensive 320 megabit cart it uses, those were pricey back then, and a little dig at Atlas for never bringing wonderful snowboard kids 2 feet to Europe. Cheeky. Martin Kitts wrote this review, by the way. This page of N64 Magazine issue 50 is giving Cruisin' Exotica on the N64 a right pasting, scoring it a miserable 43%. It's headlined as, "Is this threequel cruisin' for a bruisin'?" The reviewer, Geraint Evans, isn't holding back. Under pluses and minuses, the pluses are sarcastic bullet points like, fairly speedy, and dull. The minuses are more substantial, calling it pop-up-tastic, as bad as its ugly siblings, and shoddy presentation. They even say it looks worse than games from the 80s. Ouch. Bargay. Heyayo. There's a section asking something good, and the answer is basically no. It acknowledges there's a lot of content like tracks and cars to unlock, but says it's all pointless because none of it makes a difference to how bad the game is. They even moan about the multiplayer and the slow frame rate. Icky. If you do like this sort of thing, they recommend San Francisco Rush 2049, which they reviewed much better in N64 issue 48, giving it a whopping 91%. They call it Midway's finest racer, and say it's slick, absorbing, and huge. Big difference there. The review breaks down the game into visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and they're all pretty low scores. Visuals get slated for awful pop-up and pathetic backgrounds. Sounds are called random voice samples and dire music. Mastery is a joke, saying even Titus could do better, which is a proper low blow, considering how ropey Titus games often were. Lifespan gets a low score too, even with extra cars to unlock, because why would you bother? The verdict sums it up as simplistic and dull, don't even consider it. Brutal. There's an info burst box that lists game details like cart size, 128 megabits, and how many players, 14. but it's mostly crossed out in red as no or X for things like controller pack, cartridge save, password save, expansion pack, rumble pack and transfer pack. Basically it's lacking features. B. The screenshots are captioned with more sarcasm. One screenshot with a forklift truck is labeled, "Looks pretty, doesn't it? Don't be fooled, it doesn't make the game any better." And another with a Porsche. "That's your reward for playing. Not exactly a Porsche, is it?" Clearly they're not impressed with the graphics or unlockable cars. Overall, it's a scathing review of Cruisin' Exotica, painting it as a truly awful game and a massive disappointment after the previous Cruisin' games. Looks like this one was definitely best avoided back in the day. This page is an article reviewing Midway's greatest hits on the N64. It's all about classic arcade games brought back for the N64, which, to be honest, was getting a bit long in the tooth by 2001, so revisiting the past wasn't a bad idea, I suppose. The article is titled Spine Tingle Central and reckons these old games bring back a wave of nostalgia. They've picked out 6 games: Robotron, Defender, Juiced, Sinistar, Spy Hunter and Tapper. They describe Robotron as intense, with loads of robots on screen, and mention the psychedelic bits between levels. Defender's described as confusing initially, but great once you get the hang of it, rescuing humans from aliens and all that. Juiced apparently is still nightmare-inducing with those pterodactyls get hit by 1 pixel and you're done for, they say. Sinistar gets a bit of a kicking, being called less well-known and something you'll get gobbled up in. Spy Hunter's barren roads and speed are highlighted, and Tapper is called a morally questionable game about keeping bar patrons happy, which is a bit of a laugh. The pluses and minuses bit lists flawlessly emulated classics, and 6 games on 1 cart as positives. On the downside, they say it feels rushed, and has few extras. They also reckon if you are over 16 you might not care, implying it's more for the younger generation discovering these old titles. There's a "if you like this" section recommending Namco Museum, saying it's similar but with Pac-Man and other Namco coin-ops. Then there's a numbered review breakdown. For visuals they say Tapper is approaching medium res, we think, which is a bit sarcastic I suppose. Sounds are praised as catchy tune and crunchy synth sound, perfectly recreated. Mastery reckons 6 7-foot monsters are crammed onto a wallet-sized cart, whatever that means. Lifespan says if you were brought up on Mario 64 you'll ditch it in minutes, which is probably true for a lot of younger gamers back then. The verdict is that Midway's 6-pack just pips Namco Museum, but is still of limited appeal to most. It gets a score of 71%. The info burst table at the bottom lists Midway as the publisher, the cart size as 128 megabits, player numbers as 12, and controller pack support. It says it's out now in the US and TBA for the UK and Japan, with a cost of $50 or about £35. There are little speech bubbles around the page too. One for Spy Hunter says the barren roads of Spy Hunter make for blistering speed. One for Joust says it looks primitive but it's brilliant fun. For Tapper it's a bizarre Tapper minigame, and they also moan, the music in Tapper is ear-blisteringly bad. Sinistar gets, don't waste time in Sinistar, you'll get gobbled up like this. And Robotron is, Robotron 2084, only hardcore gamers need apply here. Defender gets, an alien's grabbed a human, shoot him. And finally one pointing to the N64 logo itself says, not what the N64 was made for. Bit harsh, but fair enough, these are proper old school games. This page is a review for Ready 2 Rumble Boxing, Round 2, on the N64. It seems they were a bit surprised by it showing up, implying they weren't exactly waiting with bated breath. There's a little previously an N64 bit where they moan about the first Ready 2 Rumble game being a bit cheap and unfair, so it sounds like they weren't massive fans originally. The main article itself talks about it having more silly haircuts and wobbly stomachs, which, let's be honest, was always part of the charm of Ready 2 Rumble. They mention it's still got that arcade feel, which is fair enough, it's not trying to be Fight Night. They were proper shocked, apparently spitting tea everywhere, when they realized you could basically button mash your way through the whole arcade mode with just one punch. Bit of an oversight that, in it. However, they do say Championship mode needs a bit more thought and strategy. There's also training modes mentioned with different routines like punch bags and aerobics, all the usual boxing game stuff. Kia. There's an info box with the game facts. Midway are the developers, it's a 256 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, needs a controller pack for saves, and rumble pack for vibrations. Release-wise, it's out now in America but TBA for Blighty in Japan, typical import situation back then. Price is $50, about 35 quid. Scattered around are little captions with screenshots. One mentions Michael Buffer still being a bit annoying with his long drawn-out speech, which is true enough, he does go on a bit. Another says, have that son, getting up again requires little effort, which is a bit sarcastic about the easy knockdowns. They also mention you need to juggle stats in the prize fight, so there's a bit of depth there apparently, and a funny line about Jet Li liking kiss and boxing, showing a character in the game. Overall it sounds like they found it a bit daft, but possibly in a good way, especially if you like a bit of arcade boxing nonsense. This page is all about Ready to Rumble Boxing, Round 2. It's a preview from back in the day, kicking off with a bit called Vogue's Gallery, which is a laugh, highlighting some of the characters. First up is Afro Thunder, apparently trying to be an action film star. Then there's Lulu Valentine, described as not one-dimensional, which is a bit of a dig. Big Willie Johnson, a 19th century style boxer with a handlebar moustache, sounds a right character. And then there's Michael Jackson, or a thinly veiled version of him, the Prince of Pop, doing something odd as always. There's a section breaking down the good and bad points. On the plus side, it says it's chucklesome, not mindless, and the championship mode lasts. On the minus, they moan about collision detection being obvious, and that you can win by just jabbing. A one-trick horse essentially, they say. A bit harsh maybe. If you liked this sort of thing, they recommend Knockout Kings 2000, saying it got 82% in N64 Magazine, and was the best N64 boxing game. Bit of a backhanded compliment to Ready to Rumble there. Shame really, they quip. Then there's the usual ratings breakdown. Visuals get a 7, described as bright and colourful but jerky. Old hat, they say. Sounds get a 6, good voices but muffled music. Anton Duchesque music. That's a bit dated now, isn't it? Mastery gets a 6 too, saying a good boxer will be let down by slow controls and average animation. Lifespan gets another 6, saying if anger doesn't put you off, the career mode will last a while. Verdict is a 76%. They say not much has changed from the first game, which isn't great, but it's fun for a bit, just not as good as Knockout Kings. So, a decent but not amazing score. Typical for a sequel back then really. It's dated January 2001, issue 65. Yeah, remember picking this up, good times. This page is the contents for Club 64, and it's dominated by WWF No Mercy. Can't miss those lads staring out at you. No Mercy was the wrestling game to have on the N64, everyone was playing that at the time. Looks like the usual sections are here. The mailbox for readers' letters, a how-to, for the world is not enough, remember that Bond game? Not bad actually. Tip section, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, Game On, I'm the Best section for Pokemon Snap Scores, Millennium Club, directory and back issues if you missed any. January 2001, yeah, that sounds about right. This page is the mailbox section, where readers get to have their say. The star letter is about someone's amusing Ocarina of Time experience. Apparently, every time this player bumped into a wall while playing as Link, Navi would shout, "Oi!" and they'd lose hearts for killing Navi. Bit dramatic for Navi. Wasn't she always annoying anyway? There's also a letter about the N64 Games Challenge book, and someone else is sticking up for Ed, wondering if he gets enough credit from Andrea. Then there's a letter from someone who tried to make their own Dr. Carol sticker, but it went wrong, so they made a Perfect Dark one instead using art from a previous issue. The editor seems to think Rare might not be too happy about it, but admits it looks good. Someone else made Mario and Donkey Kong masks for a class project, though they got the eye holes a bit too close together, which is a bit of a schoolboy error. The correction corner is pointing out a few oopsies from previous issues, like getting Dragon Ball Z character names wrong, and the release date for Tetris Attack on the SNES, which was apparently out in November 1996, not 1992 as mentioned before. And finally, there was a mistake about Arigatsu and Kanani Noko in a Pokemon Stadium 3 article. All standard stuff for a letters page in a magazine back then, keeping the editors on their toes. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, where readers get to have their say. First up, a reader called Rob from the Netherlands is asking what on earth Team 64 are playing at, saying they're not normal developers. He lists a load of crazy things he did, in games like accidentally taking out his controller pack hack during Mario's end sequence, finishing Turok 2 twice, and shooting all the cheeses in Perfect Dark, including the war cheese. He reckons this proves Team 64 are not just Team 64, whatever that means. Ed, the editor, just says they're speechless. Below this, there's a little box hinting at a new Perfect Dark deathmatch option, which sounds intriguing at the time. Jusha. Then there's a letter called This Jumble, from Rob Hack, who spotted the code for the Naboo fighter in the Dr. Kit section. He thinks the name Yngwie sounds like Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish guitar shredder, wondering if LucasArts are fans, or if it's just a coincidence. Ed sarcastically replies that they were thinking Yngwie was just a password, and mentions Paul from the Office band got excited as he's a fan. Moving on to the Dream On section, where readers pitch game ideas. First is Pokemon Trap by Ruarid McBride, which sounds a bit dark. It's like Pokemon Snap, but instead of snapping pictures you trap all 251 Pokemon, then sell them on the black market, slaughter them, sell their skins, or cut out their organs for money. Crikey, a bit grim for a kids mag, innit? Ed just says, nice. Hackiger. Lastly, there's Pie in the Face 64 Feet by Nick Hagan. This one's more lighthearted, thank goodness. The idea is to humiliate celebrities by throwing custard pies in their faces, tabloid style. You have to sneak around, get close, and make sure you get a good photo of the pieing. You even get to pie your mates with the transfer pack. Ed quips he never thought celebrities were real people either. Right at the bottom it tells you to send your game ideas to the N64 Magazine address in Bath. The next page here is the Mailbox Club. Bonus letters. Looks like readers writing in with their thoughts. Someone called Ollie from Finland reckons Link and Mario are full of Shiggy's love, which is a funny way of putting it, referring to Miyamoto's touch I suppose. Then there's Bobby from Kingston talking about icy stairs, bit random that so. Someone called P. Ravano likes Superman on the N64, despite poor reviews, bless them. The editor's reply is, no, you're definitely wrong. Ha! Straight to the point. Then there's a Tom Buckley asking about Andrea and the stick, and the editor just says, you'd rather not know. Intriguing, but probably best left alone. Ken Lau asks if Tim and Jess pop by the office, and the editor confirms, unfortunately yes. Sounds like office life at N64 Mag was eventful. There's a Mark Backler asking about Zelda soundtracks from issue 48, and they point him to Computer Exchange, CEX as it's known now I guess, for Zelda CDs. Chris Tonks is worried about the GameCube being all childish titles like Creatures, and Tiny Toons and Animaniacs, which is fair enough at the time. Early GameCube days you weren't quite sure what direction it was going to take. The editor reassures him that GameCube will have mature games too, like Resi Zero, Resident Evil Zero, and that games don't have to be all gory, mentioning Too Human. David Catena chips in about the GameCube's ease of use meaning more developers and better games, and reckons mature and less mature games can both be good, which is a decent point. James Talbot Hammond is wondering if something is Will's influence, and the editor's response about Saucer-Eyed Schoolgirls is a bit cheeky. Admiral of the Fleet Grant Macmillan asks if the editor really glues his hair down with toothpaste. A bit of a bizarre question. Alex Dunhill apologizes for emailing instead of writing a letter, because he couldn't be bothered. The editor's reply is classic, saying he's only printed a bit of the email because he couldn't be bothered to type it all in. Snarky. Down below is, so tell me this, questions and answers. Gavin Lilly wants to know what happened to the 64DD. They basically say, it's dead in the water. Japanese company RANnet pulled the plug on services, meaning no more new users. Shame really, the 64DD was a fascinating but ultimately failed add-on. Adam Snape asks a few Pokemon questions. Firstly, can you play Pokemon Yellow via the transfer pack on Pokemon Stadium? The answer is no. Then he asks if there are any Pokemon GameCube games coming. They mention Hiroshi Yamauchi hinted at a Pokemon GameCube game, and they reckon there will definitely be GBA Pokemon games, which was obvious really with the Game Boy Advance just out. They mention Nintendo are bringing out Pokemon Crystal in Japan that will link up with mobile phones, which was pretty forward-thinking at the time. Finally, Adam asks about Pokemon Bronze, and the editor jokingly says, yep, Nintendo head honcho, implying it's not real. Francis from London has questions about the GameCube controller. He asks if the buttons are analog sensitive, and they confirm the L and R buttons are now analog sensitive. He asks about the creator of Metroid being dead, and also the creator of the Game Boy being the same person. The editor says, the person who created Metroid is unfortunately dead, but then corrects himself immediately. Am I right in thinking that he's the same person who created the Game Boy? The editor says, the person who created Metroid is unfortunately dead. This is a bit of a mess up. Maybe they meant someone else involved in Metroid's development, or it's just wrong, hard to say, and no mention of the Game Boy creator being the same person, which is likely wrong. Then he asks if it took Miyamoto 3 days to write Super Mario 128. They ask, did it really take Miyamoto just 3 days to write Super Mario 128? And the editor answers, 3. Did it really take Miyamoto just 3 days to write Super Mario 128? Bit of a non-answer there, guessing they don't know or it's rumor. Lastly, he asks if the GameCube will be bundled free with GameCube. They say, is the game really going to be bundled free with GameCube? And the editor answers, 4. Is the game really going to be bundled free with GameCube? Again, another non-answer, probably just rumor mill stuff at this point. This page is the mailbag section, looks like Club 64 mailbox. Right at the top there's a bit about a poll in T3 Magazine, saying the Nintendo GameCube is smashing it with 85% of the vote for most wanted next-gen console, PlayStation 2 is lagging behind at 8%, and the Xbox even lower at 7%. Goes to show everyone was properly hyped for the Cube back then, and rightly so, what a console it was going to be. Someone called Ian McNall from Edinburgh wrote in about that. Then there's a funny bit about bad posties. A reader called Kerry Robbins from Wolverhampton made a thing to stop photos getting bent in the post, using wood, a magnifying glass and sunshine. Sounds a bit mad, doesn't it? The editor calls it a masterpiece though, and they've put her beautiful picture on the N64 board, which I guess is this page. Someone named James Mudd wants to know if the Game Boy Advance has a backlit screen. The answer is no, it doesn't. You'll need to be near a light source to see it properly, or buy one of those worm light add-ons. Remember those? They say it makes the screen easier to see in daylight, but you'll need a light to play in the dark. Then there's a call for Nintendo-related questions. Address is given as N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street in Bath. If you had a burning question, scribble it down and post it in. Looking at the board itself, there's a drawing of Pikachu surrounded by other Pokemon, labeled up like some kind of science diagram with names like Electrode, Chansey, Devong, Oddish, Voltorb, Magnemite, and Bellsprout. Someone called Chris Woodward sent in a felt Mega Man picture. Martin Pullen from Kent sent in another Mario Tennis picture, this one with Luigi playing, and Michael Benderitis from Dorset sent in a Mario Tennis one too. Then at the bottom is a big group picture of loads of Nintendo characters, Mario, Link, Donkey Kong, and loads more. Kerry Robbins sent that one in, and they can see why she wanted it to arrive safely. January 2001 issue, number 71. This page is all about WWF No Mercy, a proper classic wrestling game on the N64. It's got a how-to guide, tongue-in-cheek style, about keeping your wrestler's trousers up, which is a bit of a laugh. The article mentions the game came out around October 1999, and they're talking about the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian and Terry Runnels. They're saying how good the ladder matches are, and how long it takes to unlock everything in survival mode hours, apparently. Alan Madrell wrote this piece. There's a section called What We Said, which is a throwback to their review in issue 49, where they gave it a massive 92%. They were clearly impressed, calling it the most respectable wrestling game, even for cynics. Then there's a WHO section showing you how to create Bret the Hitman Hart, Jerry Lynn and Scott Steiner in the game, with all the body, face, hair details and ring attire listed out. Anyone wanting to play as these wrestlers back then could just copy these settings. It's a neat little guide for creating your favorite grapplers. This page is all about getting to grips with WWF No Mercy. Proper classic that. It's giving you a bit of a guide on how to get the most out of it. Starting with the Be Creative bit, which is telling you to mess about with the wrestlers, tweak their stats and moves to make your own ultimate grappler. They reckon it's the way to win belts, not just using the default wrestlers. Bit of a custom-tailored wrestling machine they call it. Fair enough, spent hours in that character creator myself back in the day. Then there's a play by the rules section, like anyone actually did that properly. But yeah, it goes through the match options, time limit, count out, pin, submission, TKO, rope break, all the usuals. Says you need to pay attention to the rules to win matches, especially title matches, which is a bit obvious really, but I suppose some folk just button mash. They even mention getting DQ'd for using a chair, which, come on, who hasn't done that in No Mercy? No. And finally, don't play by the rules. Now this is more like it. They're talking ring outs, proper cheap tactic but effective, especially against the computer apparently. Good for belt matches with time limits, they say. Sneaky way to win, and they ain't wrong. They even give you some wrestler templates, Amish Roadkill, Sandman and Yokozuna, breaking down what body type, head, face, attire and all that to use in the creator wrestler mode. Yokozuna's got the Mawashi, naturally. It's all there with screenshots from the game dotted about to show you what they mean. Good bit of No Mercy info for any young whippersnappers just getting into it. This page right then, it's all about fighting to win, some serious tips for wrestling games on the N64. It's like they're talking down to us weaklings, cheeky sods. First up is herniation, and it's having a pop at the big lads, saying if you're wrestling someone like Mankind in No Mercy, don't bother trying to lift them. Good advice really, anyone who's grappled with Mankind knows that's asking for trouble. They suggest safer grapple moves, or just button bash apparently, if you must try and lift those fatties. Bit harsh calling them fatties in it. Next is Geronimo, all about high-flying moves. They're saying those turnbuckle dives in No Mercy are good for showing off, the bee's knees they call it, but you'll get your comeuppance if you mess it up. They mention Jazz, must be talking about that wrestler Jazz, always a showman. Boring to. Then we've got Mortal Kombat, which is a bit of a misleading title, should be Mortal Wrestling Combat really, more No Mercy tips. They're banging on about reversals and counters being more important now, so you can't just go in all guns blazing. Play it careful, use weak moves first to soften them up, then go for the big stuff when they're tired. Taunting is good apparently, especially if it's a toon one, which is fair enough. gotta get under their skin. They mention Road Dogg and Gun Bun, classic tag team, the New Age Outlaws if I remember rightly. Dorington, or Woe Is Me, is about cage matches, and yeah, cage matches in No Mercy were brilliant fun. They're saying the cage walls are your friend, and to do the Tree of Woe finisher. They even tell you how to do it. Short grapple, turn them around, press left C. Simple as that. Apparently Mr. Richards gets a mention here too, whoever he is. Finally, ladder in your tights, for ladder matches obviously. Tree of Woe again. Seems that move's the answer to everything. They say smacking someone with a ladder works a treat, who knew? But be careful on the ladder, don't fall off like a numpty. Tag team ladder matches are easier apparently, if your mate keeps the other lot busy. Solid advice all round, and a bit sarcastic at the end. Woo, a premature effort. This is sure to end in pain, they chuckle. All good fun, takes me back to battering my mates at No Mercy for hours on end. Good times. This page is all about WWF No Mercy, a proper grappler on the N64. The first bit, All's Fair, is about how the game's balanced, which was a big deal back then in wrestling games. They reckon even the female wrestlers, like the Cat, are no mugs, and even big lads like Viscera can get schooled. There's a screenshot of the Cat facing the British Bulldog in a cage match, a classic SummerSlam showdown. Retty. Then there's Unlock My Heart, about unlocking characters, something you had to put the hours in for back in the day. They mention The Godfather, Andre the Giant, Earl Hebner and Cactus Jack being unlockable, which is a decent roster of legends and oddballs. Survival mode and the hardcore belt seem to be key to getting these guys. Finally, Straight to the Core is all about the hardcore rules. Backstage brawls were always a laugh in wrestling games, smashing people through doors and using weapons. Proper mayhem. They mention Funaki sending the Godfather straight to hell, and even Jim Davidson getting involved. Which is a bit random. It sounds like the backstage areas have plenty of weapons lying around to clobber your opponent with. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine is all about The World Is Not Enough on the N64. It's a how-to guide, trying to help you shake and stir your way through it, which is a bit of a Bond pun of course. Mark Green's written this one, and it's all about how to be the man with the golden touch in the game. They're bragging a bit about their review from the last issue, saying they gave it 88% and thought it was a great game for sneaking and sniping. Apparently Twine. That's what they're calling The World Is Not Enough. Shoots, sneaks and snipes with the best. Bit of a bold statement considering GoldenEye was still the benchmark for Bond games back then, wasn't it? Then there's a pre-mission preparation bit, broken down into sections. Controls tells you to ditch the default controls and use the analog stick for aiming and switch to infiltration setting for a better experience. Check info is basically saying, read the briefing you numpty, because all the mission info is in there from M, Robinson, Q and R. Controls again just reminds you that there are loads of button combos to learn, like A+B for gadgets, and to learn them before starting. Finally, cutscenes section is reminding you to actually watch the cutscenes, and not just hammer A to skip them, as they've got vital clues in them. They're trying to make out like they're proper story segments, but let's be honest, they were probably just a few lines of dialogue and some stiff character animation. So yeah, a guide to the world is not enough, telling you the obvious things really, but back then we probably lapped it up. Anything to get an edge on those tricky N64 games, especially the Bond ones, which could be right sods on the harder difficulties. This page is all about sneaky spy tips for The World Is Not Enough on the N64, which, let's be honest, everyone was playing back then. It's got a big title, ISPY, and a picture of Pierce Brosnan looking rather suave as Bond Mondoku. The page is basically doling out advice for surviving those pesky guards. First up, it says to take your time, move slowly around each level, and sidestep around corners to peak common sense really. But you know, sometimes you just rush in, guns blazing. Tip number 2 is all about strafing, sidestepping as they call it, as much as possible, because walking in straight lines apparently makes you an easy target for snipers. Then there's a point about not assuming you're safe behind glass, which is fair enough, and another reminding you to open doors carefully and sidestep through. No one wants to blunder into an ambush, do they? It also suggests creeping around junctions if you're low on health, which is a bit obvious, but hey, gotta spell it out for some players I suppose. Using crates or tables for cover is another tip. And being careful with things like cars and fire extinguishers because they'll explode if you shoot them, which can be handy for a makeshift shield apparently. Finally, it warns you to always check behind you and keep a mental map of cleared areas. Good advice for any shooter really. Then there's a bit called artificial unintelligence, which is a funny way of putting it. It's basically saying the guards aren't exactly Mensa members. It mentions how waiting around corners and sneaking up behind guards can work a treat. Crawling around levels is a good tactic, especially in the dark, And running straight past guards is a no-no, they will chase you down. Making noise can also bring guards to your position. Using sound to your advantage, see? There are screenshots dotted around showing these tips in action, and little captions with triangles giving extra bits of advice, like staying back if you're using night vision and not skipping cutscenes because they might have vital info. Yeah, we all skipped cutscenes back then, didn't we? It's a pretty standard how-to page really, in that classic N64 Magazine style, helping you get through The World Is Not Enough like a proper secret agent. January 2001. Good times. This page then is all about GoldenEye 007, no surprise there, it's still the king on the N64 even back then. We've got 6 ways to kill a man, which is a bit dramatic, but it's just going through some shooting tips like aiming for the head, wounding them first, spraying upwards, which is a bit cheeky but effective, and good old circle strafing. Standard stuff for any first-person shooter really, but they're framing it in a Bond kind of way, you know, more sophisticated than just blasting away. Then there's Don't Touch That Bond section highlighting the gadgets. Night vision goggles, X-ray vision, bomb disposal kit, and the grapple watch. All classic Bond gear, and essential for getting through those tougher bits in the game. The X-ray vision was a bit dodgy to use, to be honest, never quite worked as well as you wanted. The grapple watch though, that was brilliant for those sneaky shortcuts. There's also a bit about being a grabbing machine, basically saying pick up everything, ammo especially, because you'll need it. And a section on secret stash areas, pointing out to check dark corners and behind doors for hidden goodies. Good advice, everyone knew to search everywhere in GoldenEye, you never knew what you might find. Yeechush areas. On the side, there's a list of unlockables, maps and skins that you get for completing levels on different difficulties and times. Castle map, forest multiplayer map, air raid map, ski lift map, and then skins like exotic, soldier, mercenary, scientist, civilian and covert. You had to beat levels like Underground Uprising, Night Watch, Masquerade, Cold Reception, Midnight Departure and City of Walkways on Agent, Secret Agent, or Zero Agent, and often within specific times. Some of those zero agent times were proper tough, bragging rights if you managed them all. All in all, just standard GoldenEye tips really, but helpful reminders nonetheless, especially for the less seasoned 007 agents out there. This page is all about getting a leg up in The World Is Not Enough on the N64, a decent Bond game from back in the day, although not quite GoldenEye levels of legendary, let's be honest. It's laid out as a bunch of frequently asked questions, which was quite handy when you were stuck back then and didn't have the internet on your phone to look everything up instantly. You actually had to read magazines. There's a bit at the top about gun control, which is basically saying don't just spray and pray. Reload after every burst, tap B apparently, and pick your guns wisely. They even mention the Swiss SSR being a bit slow for close quarters combat, fair point. Then there are little boxes with gameplay tips, like using explosive barrels, which is classic Bond, and another one about letting your friendly guards do the work. Cheeky. Then we get to the actual questions. Someone's missed a phone in Night Watch. Typical. Answer is the windowed room opposite the pool. Another one is about rescuing hostages in Thames Chase. Apparently you've got to inch down the stairs with a sniper rifle and take out the guards quietly. Sounds tense. Then it's Masquerade and escaping the explosion. Just like in the film apparently, jump onto the stripy ceiling thing. Of course, obvious really. Rocket guards in City of Walkways are causing grief. They suggest night vision and just running straight at them and blasting away. Helicopter in the same level is next. Grab the Sentinel rocket launcher from the back of the car and guide the missiles. 5 hits should do it. Handy tip. Flow low. Fallen Angel has a fingerprint door problem. Apparently, it's in the start room. Go upstairs and find Bullion and scan his finger. A sinking feeling. How to fool the guards at the start. Switch to silenced, creep around, shoot the alarm and wait for the guards to come to you. Sneaky. Exit in Meltdown level is next. Follow the sub's wall lights and you'll find it in a ceiling hatch. And lastly, the bomb in Underground Uprising is in the men's toilets, furthest cubicle. Nice. At the side there's a box about unlocking suit skins and characters. Beat Courier on Secret Agent in 2 minutes for suit skins. Wylin, Max Zorin, Mayday and Tuxedo Bond are unlocked by beating the game on Secret Agent. And Baron Samedi, Scaramanga, Oddjob, Jaws, and Tuxedo Bond are unlocked for beating it on Secret Agent again. Bit of a repeat there. Team King of the Hill is unlocked by beating King's Ransom on Agent in 220. Wildfire, beat City of Walkways 2 on Agent in 340. Capture the Briefcase is unlocked by beating Turncoat on Secret Agent and Gadget Wars by beating Fallen Angel on Secret Agent in 245. Finally, Man with a Golden Gun is unlocked by beating the game on 0 Agent. Loads of unlockable stuff to keep you busy then. Overall, a pretty useful page if you were struggling with The World Is Not Enough back in January 2001. Good straightforward tips and answers to common problems. Just the sort of thing you needed in your N64 mag. This page of tips extra, brilliant stuff for us N64 owners back in the day. Right at the top it's Zelda, Majora's Mask, and the tip here is about fixing those annoying signs you accidentally slash. A quick tune on the ocarina with left C, right C and bottom C sorts it right out, the song of healing they call it. Also a tip for earning rupees quickly, bit of vulture bothering near Milk Road gets you some cash, deposit it and repeat. Classic Majora's Mask, bit weird, bit wonderful. This all. There. Next up it's WWF No Mercy, still the best wrestling game on the N64, arguably ever. Tips for the rocks people's elbow, and the 3D move, which I remember being a bit fiddly to pull off. Good old No Mercy. Hours spent with mates battling it out. Beulah. Then we've got The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. Exploding extinguishers to take out enemies, bit of a cheap trick, but hey, we weren't complaining back then. And a tip for getting rid of innocent guards with a poison dart and a punch, sneaky. Not a bad game this one, for its time, felt proper Bond. Lastly, Pokemon Snap. Everyone loved Pokemon Snap, even if it was a bit on rails. This tip is for getting a good score with Lapras. Go to the beach course, look right, take snaps as Lapras appears, then head to the bridge for another photo opportunity. Gotta get that perfect shot for Professor Oak, haven't you? Pokemon Snap, simple but addictive, trying to get all those poses, and rare Pokemon pictures. Good times. This page is showcasing some top tips and tricks for various N64 games, classic stuff from back in the day. Starting at number 5 we have Pokemon Stadium. They are talking about the high-speed GB upgrade, which is a handy little trick to speed up those Game Boy Pokemon games when you play them through the stadium. Remember plugging in the old Game Boy cartridge into the transfer pack arc rack? It was a bit clunky but pretty cool at the time. Next up at number 6 is Donald Duck, Quack Attack. Apparently there's an easy extra lives trick in this platformer. Never really considered Quack Attack a classic to be honest, but for younger gamers maybe this was their cup of tea. The tip is about replaying the first level to rack up lives, a pretty standard trick for platformers of the era. Number 7 is Mario Tennis, discussing how to unlock bonus courts. They list the Mario Bros court, Mario and Luigi courts, Baby Mario and Yoshi court and Donkey Kong courts, each unlocked by winning cups in singles or doubles with specific characters. Mario Tennis was brilliant fun, wasn't it? Lots of unlockable content to keep you busy for ages. Buckle. Section 8 is Mario Party 2. They mention the roller coaster ride minigame, saying you unlock it by buying all the minigames from Woody. Then there are extra coins if you finish the roller coaster ride on easy, and a Dungeon Dash bonus minigame by completing it on normal. Mario Party 2, definitely a party classic, although it could get a bit heated with your mates when someone stole all your stars. Number 9 is Perfect Dark, and GB Transfer Park cheats. If you had both the N64 and Game Boy Color versions of Perfect Dark and a transfer pack, you could unlock cheats like All Guns in Solo Mode, Cloaking Device, Hurricane Fists, and R-Tracker. Perfect Dark was a great game, proper spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007. Transfer packs were a bit of a gimmick but occasionally had some neat features like this. Hurricane Sir. Finally, at number 10, Zelda, Ocarina of Time. 2 tips here. One about the Scarecrow song remix which plays after the end credits if you let them roll, and another about carrying more bombs. For the bombs, it says to go to the Bomb Chew game in Hyrule as Child Link, win it twice, or go to Goron City and stop the big Goron rolling around. Ocarina of Time, what can you say? Still holds up today, absolute masterpiece. These are nice little obscure tips for those really dedicated players. Gaia. At the bottom of the page, there's a tip for the top section for Tom and Jerry, on N64. It recommends using the kitchen level and getting up on the fridge for a tactical advantage. Tom and Jerry, on N64, a bit of a hidden gem actually, decent party game for a laugh with mates. They are suggesting using power-ups, and the Plague power-up for strategic play, which sounds about right. This page is from the Club 64 Tips Extra section. It's the readers' top 15 tips, proper retro stuff. It's all about cheap tips sent in by readers. Back in the day you'd actually send these in, can you imagine? First tip is for Perfect Dark, a classic. Seems you can get knives in the unarmed training room by chucking grenades and remote mines around. Bit of a faff, but fair enough. Then there's one for Tony Hawk skateboarding. Apparently you can rinse points by doing backflips and spinning the analog stick. Easy points there then. Next, Perfect Dark again. This one's about hovering in the base level by jumping on your mate's shoulders on a lift. Sounds glitchy, but those were the days. Turok. Rage Wars gets a mention. Something about using the plasma rifle sniper through a teleporter. Classic Turok weirdness there. WrestleMania 2000, everyone was playing that back then. You can apparently give Steve Austin his proper walker music, which is good attention to detail, even if it is just computer wrestling. Galway car. Another Perfect Dark one. This is a weird one with ammo crates regenerating mid-air, creating some Matrix-style bullet time effect. Strange but cool. Strange but cool. ISS 2000 on the N64, wasn't exactly FIFA, but it was football. This tip's about getting the crowd celebrations on the big screen in the Tokyo Stadium. Bit of showing off for your virtual self then. Warrington North, Perfect Dark again, they love that game. Shoot Jonathan in the Institute in the back of the head with the laser, and he might freeze. Bit dark, even for Perfect Dark. Poridi. Jet Force Gemini tip for shield drones, use the shocker then blast them. Job done apparently. Sounds like straightforward advice. G. Perfect Dark multiplayer tip for hide and seek. Crouching down with bottom C makes the screen go black. Proper sneaky. Turok 3. Shadow of Oblivion gets a shout. Go to the area before the observatory level 2 and jump in the water for a cerebral bore. Nasty weapon that was virtual pool. Always a laugh in multiplayer. Pick an easy opponent and play 2 games. Simple as, rack up those skill ratings. Burshao. Perfect Dark. Seriously, how many tips for one game? This one's about X-ray scanners and rocket launchers, making things look a bit green. Artistic license, I suppose. Yute. Body harvest. Hold Z when entering rooms, and Adam does a somersault. Pointless but funny. Finally, Banjo-Kazooie. Jump off the bridge in the training area, into the mountain cavern, to find infinite air, handy if you're rubbish at swimming. Chi. And at the bottom there's a call to send in your own tips, 2 tips extra. And you might win a Mirage Pad, which I vaguely remember, and a N64 pin badge. Ultimate bragging rights. They even have a little form to cut out and send in, or photocopy if you're tight. Proper old school magazine stuff this. This page is the famous Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, always a good read. It's basically the problem page for N64 gamers. There's a picture of Dr. Kit's himself, looking very doctor-like, and Joe Dark from Perfect Dark, looking as cool as ever. First up, David from Barrow-in-Furness is stuck finding the bomb in the Carrington Institute in Perfect Dark. Dr. Kitts, with his usual dry wit, points out that David's not looking for a bomb at all, but the Skendar ship. He tells him exactly what to do with the data uplink. Classic Perfect Dark level, that one. Usual. Next, Craig from Moffat Mills wants to know how to get the Nintendo coin in Donkey Kong 64. Dr. Kitts tells him about the bubble and the back of K. Rool's hands, and the DK arcade game. Getting that coin was a proper mission, wasn't it? Then Richard from Wirral is asking about different endings in Operation Winback. Dr. Kitts explains the branching storylines and mentions needing to defeat all 11 bosses for the best ending. Winback was alright, a bit serious compared to some N64 games, but had its moments. Chenning. Reese from Frome is having trouble with the Monkey Trio boss in Glover. Dr. Kitts gives advice on bouncing the ball and lobbing it at them. Glover. What a strange but charming game that was. Controlling a glove and a ball, very N64. There's a screenshot of Glover here too. Those graphics are a bit blocky now, aren't they? War in Sea. Finally, Paul from Yeovil is struggling with the UFO in Area 51. Escape in Perfect Dark. Dr. Kitts, in a bit of a funny way, tells him to just jump on the hoverbike and get out of there. Area 51 Escape. Another intense Perfect Dark level. That game was packed full of them. Down at the bottom there's a section, Got a Gaming Query? It's an invite for readers to send in their gaming questions to Dr. Kitts at the N64 Magazine address in Bath. Looks like you could even cut out the form to send in. Proper old school mail in days. Good times. This page is all about testing your skills on the N64 right then. 8 challenges to test the best, it says, which is a bit of alright. First up is Jet Force Gemini Mine Tag. Tom Barrett from Oldbury cooked this one up. It's basically tag with proximity mines in Jet Force Gemini multiplayer. You select your weapons and someone is it, and can only use the mines, everyone else gets the guns. Sounds like a right laugh in multiplayer. Lobbing mines about. They've got points for the medals, looks like 8 for gold, down to 3 for bronze. Then we move on to Perfect Dark Pane in the Glass. Sam Doig from West Hill sent this in. Perfect Dark again, naturally, always a good shout. This one's in the grid arena. You set it to 2-player game with falcons in weapon slots. One player has to stand under the glass panels and shoot them out, while the other player tries to stay on the glass as long as possible. A bit of a laugh, that one. Medals here too, 9 for gold, down to 5 for bronze this time, for Pain Smashed. Next is Super Smash Bros. Pokemon Punch-Up. Alex Lawrence from Essex reckons he's the most skilled challenge editor ever. Bit cocky mate. This is for Smash Bros. You need to earn the item switch cheat, and then make it so only Pokeballs appear. Then a versus match, 1 minute free-for-all on Saffron City, using Pikachu or Jigglypuff. Basically, you batter each other with Pokemon. Medals for kills here, 10 for gold, down to 3 for bronze. Lastly, Perfect Dark Mincemeat. Charlie Nash from London sent this in. Another Perfect Dark one, this time using the Reaper in multiplayer. 4-player game in your chosen arena, 1 player is the chef with the Reaper, and the other 3 are cows. Chef health is 200%, cow health is 100%. Chef uses Reaper only, cows can punch and use cloaking. Bit of a silly one that, but Perfect Dark was always good for daft multiplayer modes. Medals for total minced, 20 for gold, down to 10 for bronze. So there you have it, 4 challenges to try out, bit of fun for your N64. This page is all about challenges for the N64, in the Club 64 Feet section. Right at the top, we've got Worms Armageddon, a classic party game back then, with a challenge called Suicide Squad. Sounds about right for Worms, doesn't it? The idea is to eliminate your own worms to score points, and you get penalized for accidentally offing your opponent's worms. Seems a bit backwards if you ask me, but there you go, you sure? Next up is Perfect Dark, with Sniper Stalker. This one's pretty straightforward, sniper rifles only in the ravine map. You've got to take out falcons, which I assume are the AI bots in Perfect Dark, and the better you do, the better medal you get. Standard stuff for Perfect Dark, really. Loads of customization options in that game. Gear. Then there's Super Smash Bros, labeled Kirby Carnage. Unsurprisingly, Kirby is the character you have to pick. The challenge is to inhale and spit out other characters to neutralize them. A bit specific, but Kirby was always a bit of a cheese character anyway, wasn't he? Finally, another Perfect Dark challenge, Fists of Fury. This one's in the Pipes arena, and it's all about fisticuffs with easy sims. Punching out as many AI opponents as you can in 10 minutes. Again, pretty simple, but Perfect Dark's melee was always a bit clunky, even back then. Down at the bottom it's asking for reader submissions for new challenges, for games like San Francisco Rush 2049, Majora's Mask, WWF No Mercy, and Pokemon Snap. Bit of a mixed bag of games there, eh? Rush and WWF, fair enough, but Majora's Mask and Pokemon Snap challenges? Each to their own, I suppose. They're offering a flashy N64 pin badge for the best ones they print. Oh, the glory. This page is a bit of a corker. It's a coming soon page for N64 Magazine. Right there in massive letters is Banjo-Tooie, finally getting reviewed. Remember the hype around that one? The bear and bird looking bigger and better, classic Rare style, promising a colossal review as they say. Below that, tucked in, is Sin and Punishment. Insane Japanese shoot-'em-up they call it. Bit of a different beast to Banjo, isn't it? Japanese games were always a bit wild, weren't they? They were teasing finding out how it plays, so it was probably something a bit different for the UK audience back then. Looks like a packed issue, alright? This page then, it's the cover of issue 51. Blimey, issue 51 already! Looks like the main game they are tipping is Mickey Speedway USA. Right on the cover it says, unlock every track, beat every ghost. It's got Mickey Mouse there looking chuffed with himself, driving some sort of souped UP go-kart. Down the side in big letters it's shouting reviewed, and they've got screenshots for Sin and Punishment, Mario Party 3 and Indiana Jones. Sin and Punishment? That was a bit of a weird one. Treasure game, properly Japanese, and pretty hardcore shooter. Imported that one myself actually. Mario Party 3. Well, everyone loved a Mario Party back then for a bit of multiplayer madness, though maybe best to hide the controllers if you wanted to stay friends after a few rounds. And Indiana Jones must be the N64 version of Infernal Machine. That was alright if you were a fan of Indy. Bit of a Tomb Raider clone really, but hey, Indiana Jones is Indiana Jones. Yeah. Then under that it says exclusive picks, and they've got Pokemon Stadium 2, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and Star Wars Battle for Naboo. Pokemon Stadium 2, yeah, more Pokemon battling action, always popular. Conker's Bad Fur Day, now that was a bit of a shocker for Nintendo, wasn't it? Rare going all adult and rude, swear words and all sorts. Probably sold a few copies just for the novelty value. And Star Wars Battle for Naboo, one of those Episode 1 games. Remember thinking the films were a bit pants, but the games were usually decent enough for a bit of blasting. And a whole lot more besides, it says. Cheeky. It was on sale Friday 19th of January, the magazine that is. Nintendo Magazine, it calls itself, plain and simple. Looks like they are giving away an absolutely free tips book for all the best games of 2000. Bit late if you needed tips for Christmas, but hey, free is free. And in the corner it says next month in Planet Game Boy, with Mario Tennis GBC, Little Mermaid Pinball, and Pokemon Trading Card Game. Game Boy Color games were still going strong back then, even with the GBA looming. Then some bullet points down the side about Skill Club Millennium, the latest results, tons of new tips and cheats, the best special investigations, latest GameCube and GBA news, and the only reviews you can trust. Bit bold that last one, everyone says that, don't they? January 2001, and page 113. There you go.